My daughter-in-law convinced my son I was developing dementia and needed professional care. She had already picked out a nursing home and was pressuring him to sell my house to pay for my treatment. The only problem? I was secretly recording every conversation, and I wasn't nearly as confused as she thought I was. People think elder abuse only happens in nursing homes or at the hands of strangers. But sometimes the biggest threat to an elderly person's safety and independence comes from family members who see dollar signs instead of a person who deserves respect and dignity. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm 73 years old, and this is the story of how my daughter-in-law tried to steal my house by convincing everyone I was losing my mind. I've lived in my house in suburban Phoenix for 42 years. My late husband Richard and I bought it when our son Tommy was just 5 years old, and we raised him there through elementary school, high school, and college. After Richard passed away 4 years ago, the house became even more precious to me as the repository of decades of family memories. The house is also worth quite a bit of money. We bought it for $45,000 in $1,982, but the Phoenix real estate market has exploded over the years. My house is now valued at approximately $650,000, which represents the majority of my life savings and financial security. I've always been clear with Tommy that the house would be his inheritance someday, but that I plan to live there independently for as long as possible. At 73, I'm still healthy, active, and perfectly capable of maintaining my home and managing my affairs. That changed when Tommy married Jessica Walsh 3 years ago. Jessica seemed nice enough during their courtship, though I found her somewhat materialistic and overly interested in discussing my financial situation and estate planning. "Margaret, you're so lucky to own such a beautiful house," she would say during family dinners. "It must be worth a fortune in today's market." "Houses are for living in, not for calculating their value," I would reply. "Of course, but it's smart to keep track of your assets for estate planning purposes." These conversations made me uncomfortable, but I attributed Jessica's interest to genuine concern for family financial security rather than greed. After Tommy and Jessica got married, they moved into a rental apartment about 20 minutes from my house. Jessica immediately began suggesting that this arrangement was inefficient and unnecessary. "Margaret, you have so much space in that big house," she would say. "Don't you ever feel lonely rattling around in there by yourself? I like my space and my independence. But think about how much money you're spending on maintenance and utilities for a house that's way too big for one person. The house is paid off and I can afford the upkeep. For now, maybe. But what happens when you get older and need more help? Wouldn't it make more sense to sell while the market is good and move somewhere more manageable? I'm not ready to move anywhere. This is my home." Jessica's suggestions about selling my house became more frequent and pointed over time. She would bring up articles about seniors who had fallen in their homes, stories about elderly people being targeted by scammers, and statistics about the cost of home maintenance for older adults. "I'm just thinking about your safety and financial security," she would say when I resisted her suggestions. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about where to live." "Of course you are. I just want to make sure you've considered all your options." What I didn't realize at the time was that Jessica was laying the groundwork for a much more elaborate plan to separate me from my house and my independence. The campaign began in earnest about 18 months ago when Jessica started expressing concerns about my mental health and cognitive abilities. "Tommy, I'm worried about your mother." I overheard her telling my son during one of their visits, "She seems more forgetful lately." "Forgetful about what?" She told me the same story about her neighbor's cat 3 times during dinner. And last week, she asked me twice whether I wanted coffee. Mom's always been a storyteller, and she's always been a good hostess who offers refreshments multiple times. I think it's more than that. I think she might be showing early signs of dementia. This conversation shocked me because I hadn't noticed any changes in my memory or cognitive function. I occasionally repeated stories or offered refreshments more than once, but this seemed like normal social behavior rather than signs of mental decline. Over the following weeks, Jessica began documenting what she characterized as evidence of my cognitive deterioration. "Margaret forgot where she put her car keys yesterday. she would report to Tommy. She got confused about what day of the week it was. She couldn't remember the name of the restaurant where we had dinner last month. All of these incidents were either minor everyday occurrences that happened to people of all ages, or they were complete fabrications. I knew exactly where my car keys were. I was never confused about the day of the week, and I remembered the restaurant name perfectly well. But Jessica was presenting these supposed incidents as patterns of cognitive decline that required family intervention. I think we need to consider getting your mother evaluated by a doctor, she told Tommy. Early intervention is important with dementia. Jessica, I think you might be overreacting. Mom seems fine to me. That's because you don't spend as much time with her as I do. Trust me, there are definitely changes happening. Jessica's campaign escalated when she began researching nursing homes and assisted living facilities without my knowledge or consent. I've been looking into some really nice senior living communities, she announced during one of our family dinners, just in case we ever need options for Margaret. I don't need senior living options, I said firmly. I'm living just fine in my own home. Of course you are, right now. But it's smart to plan ahead. Some of these places have waiting lists, so it's good to get on them early. I'm not getting on any waiting list for facilities I don't want to live in. Margaret, you don't have to make any decisions now. I'm just gathering information so we'll be prepared if circumstances change. Jessica's information gathering became more aggressive over time. She began taking me on tours of senior living facilities under the pretense of visiting friends or attending community events. My friend Sarah's mother lives here, she would say as we pulled into the parking lot of an assisted living facility. I thought we could stop by and see the place. These tours always included meetings with admissions coordinators who would discuss the facility's services, amenities, and costs with Jessica while treating me like I wasn't capable of participating in the conversation. We find that family members often need to make these decisions when their loved ones aren't able to think clearly about their needs. The coordinators would say to Jessica. That's exactly our situation, Jessica would reply. Margaret is still in denial about her condition. I would protest that I was perfectly capable of making my own decisions, but my objections were dismissed as evidence of the cognitive impairment that Jessica had described to the facility staff. The situation reached a crisis point 6 months ago when Jessica convinced Tommy that I was no longer safe, living alone, and needed immediate placement in a nursing home. Your mother almost burned down the house yesterday, she told Tommy during a phone call that I overheard. What happened? She left a pot on the stove and forgot about it. The smoke alarm went off, and when I got there, the kitchen was full of smoke. This was a complete lie. I had not left anything on the stove. There had been no smoke alarm, and Jessica had not rescued me from any kitchen fire. But Tommy believed Jessica's story and came over that evening to discuss my incident. Mom, Jessica told me what happened with the stove, he said. I'm worried about your safety. What happened with the stove? You left a pot on the burner and forgot about it. Tommy, that never happened. I haven't used the stove at all today. Mom, Jessica said there was smoke everywhere and the alarm was going off. Jessica is lying to you. There was no fire, no smoke, and no alarm. Tommy looked confused and concerned, but not about Jessica's honesty. He was concerned about my supposed inability to remember a serious incident that had allegedly happened in my own kitchen. Mom, are you sure you don't remember? Sometimes when people are stressed or confused, they block out traumatic events. I'm not confused, and there was no traumatic event. Jessica made up that story. Why would Jessica make up a story about a kitchen fire? I realized that Tommy genuinely believed Jessica's account and thought I was experiencing memory loss that prevented me from recalling the supposed incident. Over the next few weeks, Jessica continued to fabricate emergencies and incidents that supposedly demonstrated my inability to live safely alone. She claimed I'd fallen in the bathroom and couldn't get up, requiring her to come over and help me. She reported that I'd gotten lost driving to the grocery store and had called her in a panic. She said I had left my front door unlocked all night and hadn't noticed until she pointed it out the next morning. None of these incidents had actually occurred, but Jessica was building a compelling narrative that I was experiencing rapid cognitive decline and needed immediate intervention. The breaking point came when Jessica presented Tommy with research about nursing homes and proposed an immediate plan for selling my house to pay for my care. I found a really nice facility that specializes in memory care, she told Tommy during a family meeting that I was not invited to participate in, but which I overheard from the next room. It's called Sunset Manor, and they have an opening next month. Are you sure Mom needs that level of care? Tommy, she's had 3 serious incidents this week alone. She's not safe living by herself anymore. What will happen to her house? We'll need to sell it to pay for her care. Sunset Manor costs $8,000 per month, and Medicare doesn't cover everything. But that house is Mom's whole life. She's lived there for 40 years. I know it's hard, but we have to think about what's best for her safety. The house is just too much for her to handle. Tommy was clearly conflicted about the idea of selling my house and moving me to a nursing home, but Jessica had convinced him that my mental condition left no alternative. The real estate agent I spoke with thinks we could get at least $650,000 for the house, Jessica continued. That would cover her care costs for several years. You've already talked to a real estate agent? I wanted to get a sense of our options. We need to move quickly because her condition is deteriorating rapidly. I listened to this conversation in horror, realizing that Jessica had been planning to steal my house by fabricating evidence of dementia and convincing Tommy that institutionalizing me was necessary for my safety. That night, I decided to start documenting Jessica's lies and manipulation tactics to prove that I was mentally competent and that her stories about my cognitive decline were fabricated. I purchased a small digital recorder and began secretly recording my interactions with Jessica and Tommy. I also started keeping a detailed journal of Jessica's visits, her claims about my behavior, and the actual events that occurred during our interactions. Most importantly, I scheduled an appointment with my doctor to get a formal cognitive assessment that would prove my mental competency. Dr. Patricia Williams, my physician for the past 15 years, was surprised when I requested a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Margaret, what's prompting this request? She asked during my appointment. My daughter-in-law has been telling my son that I'm showing signs of dementia, and she's trying to convince him to put me in a nursing home. Have you noticed any changes in your memory or thinking abilities? None at all. I feel exactly the same as I've always felt. Dr. Williams conducted a thorough evaluation, including memory tests, cognitive assessments, and neurological examinations. Margaret, your cognitive function is completely normal for someone your age, she concluded. There are no signs of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or any other form of cognitive impairment. Can you put that in writing? Of course. I'll prepare a formal letter documenting your mental competency. Armed with my doctor's letter and my growing collection of recorded conversations, I began planning how to expose Jessica's scheme and protect my independence. The opportunity came when Jessica arranged what she called a family intervention to convince me to accept placement at Sunset Manor. She invited Tommy, my sister Helen, and my neighbor Ruth to come to my house for what she described as a caring conversation about my needs. I secretly activated my digital recorder before the meeting began. Margaret, we're all here because we love you and we're worried about your safety, Jessica began. What safety concerns? You've been having a lot of incidents lately that show you might need more support than you can get living alone. What incidents? The kitchen fire, the fall in the bathroom, getting lost on the way to the store. Jessica, none of those things happened. Margaret, this is exactly what we're talking about. You don't remember these events, which shows that your memory is declining. My sister Helen looked concerned. Mom, Jessica has been keeping us updated about these incidents. We're worried about you. Helen, I'm telling you that these incidents never happened. Jessica is lying to you. Why would Jessica lie about something like that? My neighbor Ruth asked. Because she wants to put me in a nursing home and sell my house. Jessica looked shocked and hurt by my accusation. Margaret, I would never do anything to hurt you. I'm trying to help you get the care you need. You've already picked out a nursing home and talked to a real estate agent about selling my house. I researched options so we'd be prepared if you needed them. That's called planning. Tommy looked confused and upset by the conflicting accounts. Mom, we just want what's best for you. What's best for me is to continue living in my own home with my independence and dignity intact. But what if you have another incident? Jessica asked. What if you get hurt and no one is there to help you? I haven't had any incidents, Jessica. You made them all up. Margaret, I understand this is hard to accept, but denial is common with memory problems. That's when I decided to play my trump card. Actually, Jessica, I have something that might help clarify the situation, I said, pulling out my digital recorder. What's that? I've been recording our conversations for the past month because I wanted to document what was really happening versus what you were telling other people. Jessica's face went white. You've been recording me? Yes, and I have recordings of you admitting that you made up the kitchen fire story. This was a bluff. I didn't actually have such a recording, but Jessica's reaction confirmed my suspicion that she had been fabricating incidents. I never admitted to making anything up. Really? Because I also have recordings of you talking to real estate agents about selling my house without my permission. Again, this was a bluff, but Jessica looked increasingly panicked. I think we should listen to these recordings, my sister Helen suggested. I played a recording from the previous week where Jessica had described several supposed incidents to Tommy, including detailed accounts of events that had never occurred. The recording clearly showed Jessica fabricating stories about my cognitive decline and pushing for immediate action on nursing home placement and house sale. Jessica, Tommy said slowly, these incidents you're describing on the recording, did they actually happen? Of course they happened. Your mother just doesn't remember them. But I was here for 2 of the days you're talking about, Helen interjected. I spent the whole afternoon with Margaret, and none of these things occurred. You might not have noticed. Jessica, I would have noticed if my sister had fallen in the bathroom or left a pot burning on the stove. I also showed the group Dr. Williams' letter, confirming my mental competency and cognitive function. Margaret's doctor says she has no signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. Ruth read aloud from the letter. Doctors can miss early signs, Jessica said desperately. Or maybe there are no signs because there's no dementia, Tommy said, looking at Jessica with growing suspicion. The intervention that Jessica had planned to pressure me into accepting nursing home placement had backfired spectacularly, exposing her manipulation and lies to my entire support system. After everyone left, Tommy stayed behind to talk with me privately. Mom, I owe you a huge apology, he said. I believed Jessica's stories without questioning them or talking to you directly about what was happening. You wanted to believe that someone was looking out for my welfare. But I should have trusted my own observations. You've never seemed confused or forgetful to me. Jessica is very convincing, and her story sounded plausible. Mom, what do you think Jessica's real motivation was? I think she wanted to get control of my house and my assets. Do you think she was planning to steal from you? I think she was planning to have me declared incompetent so she could gain control of my finances and property. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what Jessica had been planning. What should we do now? First, I'm going to change my will and estate planning documents to make sure Jessica never has any authority over my assets or medical decisions. That makes sense. Second, I'm going to consult with an attorney about what legal protections I can put in place to prevent this from happening again. Do you want me to divorce Jessica? That's a decision you'll have to make based on your own feelings about being married to someone who tried to steal from your mother. Tommy filed for divorce 2 weeks later. During the divorce proceedings, it came to light that Jessica had significant gambling debts and had been planning to use my house proceeds to pay off her creditors. She'd accumulated over 0 in debt from online gambling and had been facing legal action from multiple creditors when she began her campaign to have me institutionalized. Jessica saw your mother's house as the solution to her financial problems, my attorney explained. If she could gain control of your mother's assets by having her declared incompetent, she could sell the house and use the money to pay her debts. The attorney also discovered that Jessica had been researching guardianship laws and procedures for gaining legal control over elderly relatives' assets. This was a sophisticated scheme that could have succeeded if your mother hadn't been alert enough to recognize what was happening and document the abuse. I filed a restraining order against Jessica to prevent her from contacting me or coming to my house. I also reported her attempted financial elder abuse to the police and the state's Adult Protective Services. Unfortunately, this type of family financial abuse is more common than people realize, the APS investigator told me. Adult children and in-laws sometimes target elderly relatives who own valuable assets. What happens to Jessica now? She could face criminal charges for attempted fraud and elder abuse, depending on what evidence we can gather. Jessica was ultimately charged with attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and fraud. She pled guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to probation and community service. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, with Jessica receiving minimal assets due to her fraudulent behavior during the marriage. Tommy was devastated by the revelation that his wife had been planning to steal from his mother, but he was grateful that I had been smart enough to protect myself. "Mom, I'm so sorry I didn't see what she was doing," he said during one of our conversations after the divorce. Jessica was very skilled at manipulation. She almost convinced me that I was losing my mind. How did you know to start recording her? Something about her stories never felt right, but I couldn't prove they were false until I started documenting our interactions. What if you hadn't figured it out? I would probably be sitting in a nursing home right now while Jessica lived in my house and spent my money. The experience taught me valuable lessons about protecting myself from financial predators, even when they're family members. I updated my estate planning documents to include safeguards against undue influence and coercion. I established a durable power of attorney with my sister Helen, who lives nearby and has no financial incentives to exploit me. I also joined a senior advocacy group that educates elderly people about protecting themselves from financial abuse and exploitation. Financial elder abuse often comes from family members who have access to the victim's home and personal information. I learned during one of the group's workshops, the best protection is to stay alert, maintain independence as long as possible, and document any suspicious behavior. I'm now 73 years old and still living independently in my house. I maintain my own finances, drive my own car, and make my own decisions about my care and living situation. Tommy has remarried a wonderful woman named Carol, who treats me with respect and never shows inappropriate interest in my financial situation. Carol asks about my health and happiness, I told my sister. She's never asked about my house value or estate planning. That's the difference between someone who cares about you as a person and someone who sees you as a financial opportunity. Jessica occasionally tries to contact me through social media or mutual acquaintances, usually when she's facing new financial difficulties. She's asked several people to tell you that she's sorry and wants to reconcile. Tommy told me recently. I'm sure she is sorry that her scheme didn't work. Do you think she's genuinely remorseful? I think she's genuinely desperate for money and thinks I might be an easy target again. I have no interest in reconciling with someone who tried to steal my home and independence while convincing my family that I was mentally incompetent. The restraining order remains in place, and I've instructed my attorney to take legal action if Jessica attempts any further contact. 2 years later, I'm healthier and more independent than ever. I garden, volunteer at the local library, and maintain an active social life. You seem more energetic now than you did when Jessica was around, my neighbor Ruth observed recently. That's because I'm not constantly defending my sanity and competence anymore. Do you think she was actually making you doubt yourself? Absolutely. When someone constantly questions your memory and judgment, you start to question yourself too. The experience taught me that gaslighting and psychological manipulation can be just as damaging as physical abuse, especially for elderly people who may be vulnerable to doubts about their cognitive abilities. It also taught me the importance of maintaining independent relationships and support systems that can't be controlled or manipulated by potential predators. The reason Jessica's scheme almost worked was that she positioned herself as the primary source of information about my condition. I explained to other seniors during advocacy presentations. If my doctor, my sister, and my neighbors had been getting information about my health directly from me, instead of through Jessica, her lies would have been exposed much sooner. I encourage other elderly people to be suspicious of family members who seem overly interested in their assets, who volunteer to manage their affairs without being asked, or who begin suggesting that they're no longer capable of independent living. Trust your own perceptions about your mental and physical abilities, I tell them. Don't let someone else convince you that you're more impaired than you actually are. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to fight back against people who try to exploit or control you, even when they're family members who claim to have your best interests at heart. Jessica thought she could steal my house by convincing everyone I was too confused to protect myself. Instead, she lost her marriage, her reputation, and her freedom while I kept my home, my independence, and my dignity. Sometimes the best way to prove you're not losing your mind is to outsmart the people who are trying to convince everyone that you are.